you so much, Mr. Agarwal. We move on now to our next session, Nature of Future Wars. Are we ready? Our eminent panelists for this session are, we start with Lieutenant General Vijay Kumar Ahluwalia, who is a retired Indian Army officer who has last served as the General Officer Commanding in Chief of the Army's Central Command. In the Army, he served as a helicopter pilot and led the introduction of Bofors artillery weapons. Following his retirement, he was appointed as a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal for 4 years. Currently, he is the director of the Center for Land Warfare Studies, CLAWS, in New Delhi. He wrote a book, Red Revolution 2020 and Beyond, Strategic Challenges to Resolve Naxalism, based on his doctoral dissertation. He is one of the Army's most decorated officials, having received numerous awards such as Param Visisht Seva Medal, Ati Visisht Seva Medal, and several other awards for long service and gallantry. It's a pleasure to have you with us here today, sir.
Thank you.
Our next panelist, Vice Admiral Sekhar PVSM, AVSM, NM, and BAR gallantry, has had an illustrious naval career spanning over 4 decades. An accomplished naval aviator, he commanded the Indian Naval Air Squadron 300 and the premier naval air station INS Hansa. His afloat commands include INS Sarayu, INS Deepak, and guided missile cruiser INS Delhi. Promoted to the flag rank, he commanded the Western Fleet, was the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff, and the Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Naval Command. Welcome, sir. Our next panelist, Air Marshal Anil Chopra, a fighter pilot, test pilot, and a pioneer of Mirage 2000 fleet, a pioneer who commanded a Mirage 2000 squadron and 2 fighter air bases, 1 each in the Western and Eastern sectors. He was the team leader of MiG-21 upgrade project in Russia. He retired as Air Officer Personnel. He has been a member of Armed Forces Tribunal and Executive Council of GM. Welcome to you too, sir.
Thank you.
Our moderator for this session, Rotarian Commodore B.K. Ahluwalia, DSM, retired. He is a well-decorated naval officer. After his voluntary retirement from the Indian Navy, he has been actively contributing to social service by joining Rotary and other NGOs and helping in supporting 4Gs. He joined Rotary in 2014-15 and was charter president and past president of E-Club of Mumbai. He, from 2015 onwards, has been instrumental in bringing armed forces projects in our district. He is now the Director of Vision Armed Forces GP and has organized various functions on armed forces projects virtually in the most admirable manner. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here today. Please take it away, sir.
Thank you. So nice of you having given the good introduction. Now, friends, you have just heard about the economy. As you are aware, the economy and the military are complementary to each other. No economy can be strong without the strong military, and no military can be strong without the money, the economy. I'm thankful to DG Sunil Mehra, who is known as a visionary DG, immediately having sequenced our topic after the economy, the right place. Thank you, Sunil. May I also thank my 3 panelists, very, very senior officers, and who are the experts on military matters and the part of the think tank team of the Government of India, even as of date. Can we have the panelists on the screen myself so that I can start asking the questions? Can we have the panelists on the screen so that I can put the first question, please? They're on the screen. I can't see them anyway. I'm thankful to all the 3 to have come and consented and to educate all we Rotarians on military matters. which we hardly get any opportunity to have such learned and senior speakers. Sir, I'm going to put first the common question, and the second will be the specific question. The first question is, what is the nature of future wars likely to be? Like we hear about the space war, electronic warfare, bio warfare, artificial intelligence, drones, etc., etc. And are we prepared for it? Can we first start with the senior service as we do in the defense forces? General Ahluwalia, can you please give your views?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for getting me on this to share my views. I thank the DG and all the Rotary for getting me on the show. Let me say the subject is very pertinent. Nature of future wars, and are we prepared for it? First of all, I want to ask: is it really feasible to crystal gaze and predict future wars with any great accuracy? Really speaking, it is a difficult task to do. Most of the countries and armed forces who have tried to do that have generally went on to prepare for the old war and actually fought a wrong war. But the fact is, we actually have to be prepared for the next or the future war. That reminds me that we actually have to answer where, why, who, and how will it be fought. I want to remind you of Plato, the great Greek philosopher who lived 2,500 years ago, who said, and I quote, "Only the dead have seen the end of wars," unquote. Which actually means as long as there are human beings on the planet, there will be wars, there will be conflicts, and we have to be prepared for it. I won't give you any theory, but as I can see the age profile of all the participants, I'm going to speak to you about what has been the nature of conflicts over the last 1 decade. Ever since the violence began in Syria in 2011 up to now. Very briefly, I'll give you what exactly has been the profile of the conflicts in the wars. Basically, with the rapid changes in the geopolitical and revolution in technology, there has been a change in the character and nature of conflicts. You'll find that there's a great amount of focus on information and technology-enabled systems. Just go back to see in the last 1 decade, from 2011 onwards, large number of conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, Syria, fight against the ISIS, then also extension or annexation of Crimea in 2014, the Ukraine crisis in 2014. Last year, we had the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And also now, recently, we had Israel and Hamas. What are the essential features of these conflicts? Technology-enabled systems like armed drones, counter-drone measures, loitering munitions, precision-guided munitions, surgical strikes by the air, also stealth technology being used by systems to get accurate information about the targets. And that's why you find that last year, General Soleimani was attacked and killed as soon as he moved out of the Baghdad airport. That accurate was the information by facial recognition and other means that they could target the Iranian on the Baghdad airport. Also to tell you what else is there is non-state actors participating, mercenaries, private military companies, as also a great amount of focus is on information warfare, which actually means a great amount of employment of social media, psychological warfare. Last year, you have seen while we had the incident in Galwan, China's state-sponsored print media, Global Times, as also the TV, continued to change the perception of the population, both in China and India. So that exactly is going to happen, that you find that psychological warfare, propaganda, and perception management would be a part of it. Also, if you look back, there was a great amount of political manipulation. There's a great amount of regional and extra-regional powers actively involved in all these conflicts. They had, whether as part of a alliance or partnership, or for the national interest. Large number of regional, extra-regional powers. Also, you realize that non-military means have been used to achieve political military objectives. After they launch the non-military means, then they follow it with military means. So therefore, you find that really speaking, the conflict of the future, really speaking, will involve around information and technology. It will be multi-domain operations, which means other than traditional land, air, and sea, it will also have, as Commodore Ahluwalia said, cyber, space, electromagnetic systems, information warfare, psychological warfare, and the kind. So this is something that will happen. Geographical areas or big boundaries, they become borderless. You could be moving across, having non-contact, non-kinetic forms of warfare. Also, you'll find that there are multiple stakeholders. It is just not state versus state. Today, a conflict is caused by non-state actors, oblique militant groups. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, you have Houthis in Yemen, you have ISIS, you have Al-Qaeda. They actually call. And therefore, the very concept of victory in a conflict actually has changed over the years. We actually are looking at what is known as hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is a blend of political, economic, informational, military, subconventional, and organized crime all put together, whatever suits to achieve the objectives. And what is known as gray zone in a very simple manner is oscillating between war and peace. Just to inform you, India has been at a gray zone conflict right since 1989. Ever since Pakistan started the proxy war, come state-sponsored terrorism against Jammu and Kashmir, we find that we are at no war, no peace. I commanded the brigade on the line of control in Uri. I commanded the division in Kargil, again on the line of control, and the corps in Leh Ladakh, which was both line of control with Pakistan and line of actual control with China. To find that as far as Pakistan was concerned, we continued to remain at what is known as no war, no peace. Therefore, they will not try to cross the threshold of the open war, but yet you are at war. So this is the kind of conflicts that you will see in the future. I think I'll leave it there at the moment. I'd like my other panelists to take on.
Thank you very much, General. Admiral Sheikh Hasina, sir, your views on it.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, District Governor of the Rotary District, and distinguished participants, Rotarians who are here. I have been asked to give my views on the nature of future wars and how it will be fought. Let me just put my views that since the Galwan crisis, India has entered a period of two live borders. Earlier, we had one with Pakistan, which was live, and one with China, where they were, by and large, except for small skirmishes, the fight was localized and it was sort of resolved temporarily. But what has happened now is that the relationship between these two countries, India and China, has really been derailed completely. And I don't think it's going to be ever very similar again. So what I'll do is I will not repeat. Very distinguished panelist, General Ahluwalia has put those things very much in order. And at the cost of not repeating, the armed forces had seen this coming for a long time. And it was in the year 2008, 2009, the first time that the armed forces, under the guidance of Raksha Mantri's operational directive, issued a document called the Two-Front War. And that is when it came, because we knew it all this while, that there will be two-front war. But as far as Navy is concerned, there is just one front, that is Indian Ocean. And therefore, the quantum and the geography is quite reasonably well defined. But let me just say that we have two adversaries on our two land borders. And there is a maritime collusion of both these countries. And not that it is not collusion on the land borders. There is, but it is not sort of displayed outside, whereas at sea, it is virtually on display for the whole world to see. Tomorrow, as General Ahluwalia also mentioned, there will be no difference between peace and war because the big wars are very unlikely to be fought. It will be in the gray zone, as he rightly said, and therefore it will keep irritating you, and the blame of escalating it to a bigger war might be left on you, so that the opposing countries can take on the task of possibly harming you or decimating you. So I would say that there will be no boundaries, as he rightly said. So what happens in the peacetime? Peacetime, we are, it's already at war. You see the psychological warfare which China is spending money on, the press all over the world, people who are being paid in your neighborhood, the string of pearl strategy is very much, so China is actually trying to, get us inside that ring. Our systems, or how should our systems be in future? First of all, let me just state that China is not 10 feet tall. China is something which can be very much be tackled in all three domains. I have no doubts about that. But our systems, our development of weapon systems should be such that we need the ability to gather, transmit, process, understand, and act on the information faster and more accurately than the adversary. This is very important, because if it is going to be information warfare, if it is going to be a short of full-scale war, if it is going to be gray zone war, then these are the ingredients where we have to have an initiative. Is something happening? I will mention a few little later in my talk. Advantage in peace and victory in war will demand a mixture of both technical information systems and cognitive functions such as command decision making. Our aim should be to preferably attain an advantage by degrading the adversary systems and protect our own systems and those of our friends. So while disrupting the enemy's systems, the cognitive command processes and sustaining our own should be our aim. These imperatives create a techno-cognitive confrontation, as I call it, which is continual of the widespread, which does not differentiate between peace and war, with what he was talking about. So we'll have a hybrid war. Does it mean that conventional war is dead? No, it is not, because we still have to protect our land borders. We still have to, the boots have to be on the ground. So therefore, it will be a combination. And that's why people talk about hybrid war. Yes, it is going to be hybrid war, because while conventional war cannot be ruled out, the other systems, for example, what is given in the concept note, the AI, the artificial intelligence, you got cyber, you got, space war, all kinds of things. So all that will happen, it will try to disable your systems so that the stage of doing a hand-to-hand battle on the ground does not come. Bioweapon. Now there is a lot of talk about the Wuhan virus having been let out from the laboratory. If that happens, then you're going to put the entire, border guarding forces into, a mode where they will not be able to fight. So you're going back to, winning a war without fighting, which is the, Chinese sort of funda. So I think that I will stop here. That technology, stands, absolutely at the core of today's strategic competition between China and the Quad countries. And therefore, we will have to have much attention on these, because if your systems are degraded, your airline, your booking, your trains, your what have you, all kinds of system can be bugged, all kinds of system can be derailed, so that you don't have the ability to fight. So that is where we have to go and develop.
Thank you, sir. Air Marshal Anil Chopra, sir, can we have your views more specifically to the air power, future wars and the air power, if you can educate us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commodore Ahluwalia. As always, the Air Force has the last word. Thank you, Rotary, for the invite. a great panel, very dear friend, General Ahluwalia and Admiral Sinha. We meet regularly in Delhi, all three aviators. And now you know where the action is. Immediately after the World War II, Major Paz realized that one who controls aerospace controls this planet. I think this vision view has come within our country also. Air power today is the dominant means of prosecuting war. It offers prompt multiple response options to the political leadership. Air and space give a vantage point to see a wide area, allow connectivity, allow large distance, high-speed weapon transit, and helps targeting. So today, space greatly supports all warfare on Earth, and weaponization of space is becoming a reality. And as I have been told by moderator, I will concentrate only on the aerospace aspects. Aerospace offers speed, range, accuracy, lethality, and achieves multiple types of military effects. Even armies and navies are wanting to spend more and more on air assets today. The Navy wants the aircraft carrier, and the Army wants all kinds of aircraft. They all be having a significant number of helicopters. Air power and future of all warfare is therefore intertwined. Air security will still be a prerequisite for all operations on the surface to succeed, maritime or on the ground. Air campaigns can be executed simultaneously against different spread out targets in different zones, including globally. It can provide both kinetic and non-kinetic options and pinpoint accuracy. It can influence outcomes and actions of the surface forces. It can simultaneously produce physical as well as psychological effects. You know, a bombing raid can sort of demoralize the nation. Strategic airlift is another area of strategic reach and strategic effect, and Indian Air Force has demonstrated this repeatedly, including in the recent COVID times. Now, air power is inherently strategic in nature and simultaneously provides conventional deterrence. It's technology intensive and has early obsolescence, requires greater investments in R&D as well as funding for purchases. Now, IF is looking at a reach from Persian Gulf to the Straits of Malacca, the area which the Indian Navy is also covering. And of course, Indian Navy goes much beyond that into Indian Ocean and the Pacific. We use long-range aircraft supported by aerial refuelers and AWACS, and more of these are being acquired. The Indian Air Force is transforming. They're going from being a platform-centric to a capability-based, effect-based, network-centric operations-based Air Force. The advantage of air power is the ability to exploit swing wing roles. We all have heard when the Rafale came that it's an omni-role fighter, which means it can do many missions at the same time in a single mission. Now look at this, because the air is at a vantage point, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, these have become very, very important for all kinds of warfare on the ground, considering that everybody is fighting a network-centric warfare. So air power is best suited for the ISR function. Now, both the speakers briefly mentioned about the Wuhan virus. The biological warfare has been there for centuries. Globalization has allowed the virus to spread even faster. People are asking, how come China did not suffer any casualties? Was it a weapon targeting select other countries like India and America who suffered much more than some of the other countries? Investigations will tell us one day, I presume. Now, since all countries engaged in network-centric warfare, cyber and electronic warfare have become very, very important, and securing our own networks while denying the same to the adversary will be important. Air and space platforms are greatly suited to support cyber and electronic warfare, and it can support this warfare deep into the enemy territory. And there are dedicated aircraft with all air forces for this purpose. The other point I want to mention is the future is unmanned. The artificial intelligence has supported autonomous systems which will fly independently or in conjunction with each other in a form of a swarm or with the manned aircraft as a team. This is an area India is already investing, but much more needs to be done. Unmanned systems are required for civil use, for logistics, delivery, policing, and variety of other civil roles. But in military, they normally take on the dull, dirty, and dangerous mission. Now, dull mission is the one which is long, boring, reconnaissance kind of mission. Dirty mission will be where if you enter a contaminated area where a nuclear weapon has been or a biological weapon has been used, or dangerous areas which could be a contested area which has been well defended. So you will perhaps send an unmanned system over there. Now, due to multiple dimensional nature of conflict, increasing levels of synergy is required between armed forces, civil agencies, and this is very critical for operational use, because in cyber, the civil will have to get greatly involved. Your second part of the question is India really ready? Yes, we are, but always there is more need to be done. Firstly, I'm very happy that the political direction to the forces is very, very clear, and they have given free hand for the armed forces to handle the tactical and strategic situation in the country. Speaking for Indian Air Force, I must say that as far as fighter squadrons are concerned, while we authorized force levels of 42 squadrons, we are currently down to just 32. So this number has to, quickly get back. But on many other counts, whether it's transport fleet, helicopter fleet, I think the Indian Air Force is in a good shape. We certainly need to invest much more in unmanned systems, especially the UCAVs, that is the unmanned combat systems. The Chinese are known to use surface-to-surface missiles and cruise missiles. We need more air defense systems. We know that S-400 has already been ordered, and we all have seen the Iron Dome being used by the Israelis during the recent conflict. We have got great joint ventures with the Israelis, and we are developing some SAM systems with them, and I think we are doing well. Indigenously, we have made the Prithvi, Agni, BrahMos, Akash, Astra, and many other missiles, and I think again we are doing extremely well. Certainly, we need to invest more in electronic warfare and cyber warfare. Considering that we have two fronts war, I think we need to have the defense budget go up. Critical thing is buying technology is not easy. Nobody shares it. Atmanirbharta is correctly the mood of the season, and we have finally come of age in the LCA program and building good helicopters. We have a great space and missile program, and I think it's very important that the LCA Mark 1A and Mark 2 and the advanced medium combat aircraft, they have to succeed. Since we have a good private industry audience, I must say that the country needs to hold the hand of the private industry, because they have to come in a big way. We already know that Tata's, L&T, Bharat Forge, Adani's, Mahindra's, Reliance, they're all already there, and there are many, many small players. And I think for India to succeed for any future war, we need to get the private industry to come in. The new technologies, direct energy weapons, lasers, the hypersonic flight and weapons, sixth generation fighter, the Americans, the Chinese, the Russians, they are going big into this. And if we are today the fourth largest, armed forces in the world, or the third largest army, we need to get into some of these areas and start to invest. All I want to assure you is that IF is always ready, and it will always continue to touch the sky with glory. Thank you. And back to the moderator, please.
Thank you, sir. To redress your point that you are the Air Force, the last one, let me ask you the second question, the first one. You find nowadays we see our northern neighbor China getting friendly with Russia, Pak in any case, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nepal. What do you think that our strategy should be to handle not only the aggressive northern neighbor, but also if this group becomes more active militarily? Very briefly, sir, we are running against the time. Okay. Very brief.
Yeah, thank you. China, Pakistan, Russia, this connection is something the world has been talking about. And I must tell you that Russia is a time-tested friend of India. Nearly 60% of the equipment of the Indian armed forces of Russian origin. Russia needs India as much as India needs them. Russia has serious boundary issues with China. They have fought wars. China is becoming independent of Russia for arms supplies. And in fact, is taking over many of Russian arms markets in Asia and Africa. China is also claiming parts of Siberia as theirs. Therefore, this arrangement between Russia and China has got its own negative dynamics. Russia always wanted to be friendly with the West. USA has unfortunately pushed Russia into the Chinese arms. So Russia-China equation is of convenience and may not last forever. That's issue number one. Russia is currently not happy about India becoming closer to USA and buying their arms. This is quite natural, and this is a normal reaction from that. In offering some helicopters and other systems and doing exercises with Pakistan, it's a mild signal to India to say that, okay, don't go too much far into this Quad or to go towards the Americans. Remember, a single purchase of S-400 air defense missile system by India is more than the total weapons sold by Russia to Pakistan ever. So our relationship, we must understand with Russia will remain different. No, yes, China-Pakistan nexus is of concern. It's Pakistan insurance against powerful India. Also, the CPEC helps China reach out to the oil-rich Middle East and closer to Africa. Lease of Gwadar port does give greater access to Indian Ocean to the Chinese. Chinese boats in Indian Ocean, as has been covered by the Admiral and part of the string of Pearls strategy, are important for India to watch, but India is finding its way. China has made many enemies. Many Asian countries have been affected by China when they usurped South China Sea, especially Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia. Now, Japan, Australia, India, and Australia and USA forming Quad, with some of the Southeast Asian nations will join as a Quad Plus. Many European nations like UK, France are participating in the freedom of sea operations. So Chinese are being exposed for their actions in Xinjiang and Tibet. Chinese people lack freedom. China is more worried about USA leaving Afghanistan because troubles may spill into China's Xinjiang area. So we need not get too worried with all these connections which are developing. Nepal is vacillating, Sri Lanka is vacillating, Bangladesh is in our fold. So I just want to sum up to say that we need not worry. These connections are being handled, and India's current policy of strategic autonomy, I think, is working well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With the permission of Senior Service General Ahluwalia, may I ask Admiral Shekhar Sinha, sir, Air Marshal has touched upon the Squad partly. Could you please educate us on Squad? Is that the only strategy where our northern neighbor is encircling us by having the bases all around us? Your views on that very briefly, sir.
So let me put it across that we are looking at. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me?
Sir, loud and clear. We can hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
You're absolutely right that the China's influence in the neighborhood has increased quite a lot. Just the other day, China, procured one piece of land in Sri Lanka's Colombo port, which is obviously a matter of great concern and worries us all of us. But to imagine that China will take head on with India in the Indian Ocean is a little bit of a far-fetched idea. Because if you see the logistic trail of Chinese ships and submarines which operate in the Indian Ocean, it's a very long trail, and it is going to be quite some time before China has adequate number of bases in the Indian Ocean. One is already operational at Djibouti, and the second one is likely to be in Gwadar. As far as Quad is concerned, you would recall that during the Quad meeting, the summit meeting, one of the groups which has been formed, it is called the Critical and Emerging Technologies Working Group. And this is very important to note because it has to do 2-3 things. It has already got a charter. One is to block the supply chain advantage to China and make it more to be contained within these 4 countries. So that work is going on at a fairly high speed. Second agreement which has been signed, that technology design, development, and its usage, who all have got what, and how much should be assistance should be given to those who don't have. So basically to create the capability building. And thirdly, cooperation in telecom, the deployment of assets, the interoperability. When you look at all this, we are fairly well geared up with Quad. As you know that we have interoperability with the Japanese Navy, we have interoperability with the Australians in some cases, and with America we have virtually all sort of. There is also cooperation of biotechnology and on the 5G that India and these three countries will only restrict the 5G to the not to the Chinese companies, which is basically means Huawei and ZTE. Coming back to what India is doing on its own, well, we are a late entrant. We have to look at the disruptive technology. As far as hardcore fight is concerned, as I said, we have a great advantage right now. We have to have the penetration of the missile defense system, what is called the hypersonic cruise missile. We need to have the methods of hypersonic glide weapons and missiles, and more importantly, how do we counter these missiles when they come to you? So there is going to be a space-based approach. You know, there will be laser weapons, there will be particle beam weapons, and some of it which can be fitted on board the ships. Some trials are already going on. I need not say beyond that. So I have a feeling that, you know, we, though we are behind time on our own, but the Quad Technology Working Group having already got activated, I think this is a time for us to take off. We have supersonic surface-to-surface missiles on all our ships, whereas the Chinese have only on 2 ships. One is the X-Sovereignty class, and one there is a new ship called the Shenzhen, which has got this YZ-12 surface-to-surface missiles. So I think that by and large, we have to continue going forward on this. The defense budget, as Air Marshal Anil Chopra said, that the defense budget has to go up. And I don't know how much it is to go up. How much will the government be able to afford in the post-pandemic when the economy is right now on the downwards? That is something that we have to look at.
Thank you, sir. General Ahluwalia, very briefly, since we are running against the time, you have been the Div Commander in Kargil, the Corps Commander in Ladakh. Can you, and the place last year's physical scuffle and casualties, can you tell us very briefly the present status and our strategy in that area?
Very briefly, I would say, first of all, we have to understand that all the 3, China, India, and Pakistan, are nuclear armed states. And President Xi Jinping in 2018 January made a very categorical statement. I quote, "There will be no loss of territory by China left over by our ancestors," unquote. All the 3 countries maintain that there will be no loss of territory, because territory today is the surest test of sovereignty of a nation. Therefore, what we see today in Eastern Ladakh, I just want to make a mention that Eastern Ladakh standoff last year, there is no doubt that they moved motorized division and a mechanized division from a training exercise area onto Ladakh. That was a surprise element. But how did India react to it? India shocked China, surprised China, one, by robust and rapid mobilization and deployment of Army, Air Force, and the Navy in their respective places, which they did not expect first. Secondly, despite their objection to our building our infrastructure, we and the Army continued to build our infrastructure right across 3,488 kilometers of line of actual control with China. Third, the biggest shock that they got was when we, on 29th, 30th August, decided to go and occupy the strategic heights south of Pagong So, as also certain heights to the north of Pagong So. That gave India a huge leverage and on the negotiating table to call the shots. And that was one area that the heights were so very important that they give so much insight into the strategic highway of China. And fourth one sensing that we are likely to move into winters last year, India did well to stock their logistics for the winters, and we continue to remain logistically sustainable and balanced in Ladakh because of that proactive action. Lastly, where everyone matters, who all are the participant here, all elements of national power, political, economic, trade, investment, information, banning all the apps, that was a united stand that the country took against China, which China did not expect. Therefore, I think that we did well, and we continue to make sure that we are steady on the entire stretch of the entire LAC that we have with China. I'd like to make a mention that there are some little different aspects that I have to look into now. It is not just China alone. China has developed China-Pakistan economic corridor that runs from Xinjiang right up to the Gwadar port. It has been mentioned about the string of pearls. Now that lies to the west of Ladakh. To the north lies the important communication arteries of China. To the east lies their main highway that runs from Xinjiang to Tibet up to Lhasa. Eastern Ladakh is strategically so very important as a wedge which we hold so strong to ensure that there is nexus between the two countries does not take place, at least physically, of that area. So they are very sensitive to anything that we do over there. Just to quote very quickly, DBO, Dawlat Beg Oldie, is the highest airstrip in the world. The height of the airstrip is 18,500 feet. Mumbai is sitting at 0. So 18,500 feet. On 31st May 2008, when I was the co-commander, along with the Air Force, we operationalized DBO after 45 years by landing an aircraft, transport aircraft by the Air Force. I tried desperately hard as a co-commander, trying to get in touch with the Chinese to tell them that we are going to land our transport aircraft and we are going to operationalize our airstrip. They were not concerned. But the moment last year, we converted the Shok and DBO road, they became very sensitive to the excitation. Therefore, are we really prepared? My answer is that yes, first of all, you have to understand that China is a strong power, strong economy, second largest economy of the world, strong military. So they have a robust defense industrial base, a great focus on cyberspace, technology, artificial intelligence, and lethal autonomous weapon systems, robotics, electromagnetic. But that does not mean that we are weak under any circumstances. My view is that we have certainly focused on, at least it has been a good awakening call, that we have been focused on developing our infrastructure, to ensure that we bring in our information, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability. And third is to ensure that we have a border management posture which is disputed so that we have synergy of effort between the paramilitary force and the armed forces. Also, there is an organizational structure taking place. Also, a rebalancing of forces is taking place based on the threats that we see today and 10 years later. I'm glad that the armed forces are looking 10 years ahead to say what kind of threat is likely to come up and what we need to do. As also the fact that it is brought out to build up our capability and capacity, certainly additional budget would be required. I want to quote, to fight China, who recognize only strength, we must bring in credible deterrence capability. And credible deterrence capability is a function of capability.
Gentlemen, I'm really sorry to butt in, but we really need to wrap this up because we're running half an hour behind schedule.
And with that, I want to confirm to the audience that we are a prepared nation to take on these challenges, no matter Western neighbor or the northern neighbor or on the seas. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Can we go ahead to the next? I understand we are running short of time, so we can't have any time for question answers, which can be sent one to one and we can clarify. Can we have the next, honoring the war hero? And can we run that AV on that? Brigadier Best.
So,
can we run his AV, please, as you had planned?
On the 20th of April 1999, on receiving information about the militants hiding in the area of Chulipuram, Jaffna, Sri Lanka, Captain Jayanarayan Singh Bisht quickly organized a raid on the hideout and himself led the assault on the militants. Despite heavy volume of effective automatic fire of the militants, Captain Bisht, along with Lance Naik S. Chelapam, charged the militants from a flank. He killed one militant on the spot and thereafter, in hot pursuit, charged into a house where militants were hiding. One militant who was injured attempted to flee. Captain Bisht pursued the fleeing militant till he was trapped and shot dead by one of the stops very imaginatively deployed by Captain Bisht. This lightning and bold raid by Captain Bisht led to the killing of 3 militants and recovery of 2 AK-47 automatic rifles, 4 magazines of AK-47 rifles, 4 hand grenades, ammunition and document of great importance for collecting intelligence. Captain Jayanarayan Singh Bisht displayed conspicuous courage and valor in the face of the militants. Rotary District 3141 proudly presents Vocational Excellence Award to Captain Jayanarayan Singh Bisht for displaying conspicuous courage and valor in the face of the militants on April 20th, 1999, Sri Lanka. Captain Jayanarayan Singh Bisht.
Bisht, very briefly, can you tell us that how did you feel taking the decision, knowing fully well that was risky and jumping perhaps into the death trap? Can you very briefly tell us about the operation? How did you feel at that time? Brigadier Bisht, please.
So, thank you very much, Rotary, and thank you everybody on the panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sir, this has brought out, it happened on the 20th of April, 1989. Almost operations were dying down there by that time. And I had gone to a neighboring brigade operation for 48 hours. After 48 hours, when I came back in the morning around about 5 o'clock, after relaxing over a cup of tea at about 9:30, I got information from my informant. My informant came and he said, sir, this is militants having a conference in a house where the Jaffna garrison commander is there, Captain Thumban, and there are 4 militants there. One is standing outside at the gate and one is gone out probably get some eats for them. I was definitely tired very badly. But you cannot hide this kind of information from your bosses. I informed my boss, CEO, Colonel PG Pawar, sir, this is what the information is come. He said, how sure you are about the information? As an informer is a owner of the house where the militants are hiding. Since he has been thrown out of his house, so that's why he is come and giving me the information, and he has been giving me information in the past also. But seldom the operation was of worthwhile value. He used to come and say, sir, 4 militants have come and go on. I said, sir, the second part, I'm totally tired, not in a position to, I have to go very fast. If I don't move very fast, I might miss them. So I need permission to go in a vehicle, which is not a very, very good idea in the operation of counterinsurgency and insurgency. After giving some thought, my boss said, okay, I give you permission. You can move in a RCL Jeep and a 1 ton. But he says, I want to know the operation, how you going to conduct the operation. I said, please come forward in a forward platoon locations, where in a room with the help of the charcoal, I narrated the story to him. Sir, this is how the house layout is there. I had the very, very intimate knowledge of that area. I have made all my maps in that area. I knew each and every house. We used to move from house to house. I said, there are 2 gates. One is wicket gate for the man people. One is a vehicle gate. The individual militant is hiding, seeing the sentry duty at the wicket gate. If you give me permission, I'll go quickly from the west and put the party from the north side. That was the plan. Lucks are in the operation. Last month, one has to change the. When I move forward, ask my platoon commander JCO, So you go from the west and cover it up. He says, sir, I don't have the intimate knowledge of this area. So perforce, I had to go and drop in my vehicle. First time in the history of Indian Army, the stops were dropped in the vehicle and I moved from the opposite direction. The moment I about to enter the house, stop my vehicle, they started firing on us. So I had only one choice, either I go in a small group. So I told all the parties to hide wherever you get a cover. I told Lance Naik Chilappan, who is my Kamal interpreter, you give me covering fire and I'll move inside the house. He kept giving me covering fire. I moved from another direction toward the house. The sentry who was there at the gate, by the time I knocked him out. And the other militant, I saw him going inside the house. In a spur of moment, I'm sure if somebody gives a logical thought, he'll never do it. He entered the house. I also kicked the house, entered the house. He was hiding under the cot where some grains and onions, tomatoes are kept. I kept firing in the house and came out. When I came out, I told Lance Naik Chilappan, nobody is inside the house. Can you go and search the other room? So the route to the other rooms were from that room on. He went inside and came out running. He says, no, sir, militant is already hiding inside. I said, okay, now $1 million question. I could not dare to go inside the house second time. Anyway, we cautioned him in Tamil. We told him, you come out, we'll give you, otherwise we'll fire. He did not come out. We thrown the grenades. And then the normal house opening drill, we lobbed the grenade and I entered the house. He ran out of the house. I started chasing him. After 500 to 600 yards, my outer stops were there. Inner stops could not fire because we were also running behind. And he was killed by the stops, those who were there in that. Meanwhile, the militant, another militant who was hiding inside the house, probably with the help of our hand grenade, he got killed there. So we, in the operation as brought out, we got all 3 militants killed along with the operation. I informed my boss on the radio set, sir, successful operation has been completed. He says, no. Like typically we say, what is the proof? He says, put all the praise in your vehicle and bring them to battalion headquarters. So we put all these 3 killed militants along whatever ammunition, arms we could recover that time from them, and immediately moved back to battalion headquarters, where the so-called display of photographs were taken. First time in the history, all the 100% kills were taken to the battalion headquarters, and then they were given to the people for their last rites. That's how the operation ended. It was a daylight operation, sir, at about 11:30 in the morning. Very rare to go inside the militant hideouts in the daytime operation. Those days, we never had that kind of bulletproof jackets also. We were just, you must have seen the photograph. I was just not even a combat uniform. I was just having the normal OG uniform, because that was the only piece available with me that time because of the last 48 hours operation.
Brigadier Bish, could we please request you to move a little bit back so that we can see you fully, sir? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brigadier. So nice of you. Well, friends, only thing to say now is that when we Rotarians honor and felicitate such war heroes, it is not only to honor Brigadier Bish, it is to honor and send the message loud and clear to the man on the ground that if you do sacrifice, whenever the sacrifice comes, it will not go unrecognized. There is one NGO that is Rotary. Even after your retirement, you will be honored and you will be recognized. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving us so much of time. Thank you.
Kamalji, yours. Kamalji.
Thank you, Bish Saab. You make us so proud. आपकी वजह से हम लोग सुरक्षित रहते हैं. God bless you, sir, for whatever you are doing. Thank you so much. And protecting the country borders is a tall order, but आप इतनी सरलता से वो काम कर लेते हैं. So आपकी वजह से सुरक्षित रहते हैं, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Honor to be associated with you, sir.
Brigadier Bish, we actually are honored that you are here with us today. And I actually endorse what Kamalji just said. And thank you for being part of our Indian society to help us stay safe. I have had the fortune of seeing the other panelists also on another platform. I do recollect that. So it is good for all of you all to be here. Just to inform you that we are now, Kamalji, this is also for you, in the process of setting up the first Vision Armed Forces Rotary Club.
That's a great.
Which is going to be of ladies, retired ladies. It's coming up. It's probably going for charter in the next 2 to 3 days. So thank you for being here once again.
Thank you, sir. Honored, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.